She was just an assistant. Until he risked his empire to love her. He built a billion-dollar empire by burying his heart, but she made him feel like a man again. Ethan Kross was the ruthless tech mogul who controlled everything, except her. Sophie Lane walked into his office with a fire in her voice and secrets in her eyes. She wasn't hired to fall in love, but love was never part of his business plan. What happens when the man who never apologizes puts everything on the line, for the one woman who never needed him to? Hear this full dramatic billionaire love story unfold, packed with secrets, betrayal, redemption, and a wedding that'll break you. Tell us, would you forgive a man like Ethan Kross? He treated her like a nobody, until she made him feel like a man again. In a world where power is everything, and emotions are weaknesses, what happens when a woman refuses to bow down? Ethan Kross was a name that echoed through boardrooms like a thunderclap. At 39, he was the ruthless CEO of Kross Tech, one of the most powerful tech empires in New York. He built it from the ground up, brick by unforgiving brick, turning every setback into a calculated triumph. To his investors, he was a genius. To his competitors, a nightmare. But to those who worked under him, Ethan Kross was a tyrant in a $1,000 suit. He didn't believe in second chances. He didn't tolerate mistakes. And most of all, he didn't do emotions. His calendar was color-coded to the second. His assistant had quit just 2 weeks ago, after crying in the elevator from a single comment he made about her lack of strategic thinking. HR was terrified of him. The legal department was always on edge. And rumor had it, he once fired a junior associate for bringing him lukewarm coffee. Twice. So when Sophie Lane walked into his office for the first time, wearing budget heels, clutching a notebook, and armed with a resume that wasn't Ivy League, no one expected her to last. But Sophie wasn't there to impress him. She was there to prove a point. Fresh out of a complicated family situation and working 2 jobs to support her younger sister through college, Sophie had zero time for egos. She was brilliant, tough, and painfully real. Her degree may have come from a small state school, but her instincts were razor sharp, and she'd been underestimated her entire life. From the moment they met, the sparks were undeniable, but not the romantic kind. No, this was war. Their first meeting lasted 11 minutes. He dismissed her 3 times. She corrected him twice, and when he told her bluntly, "You're not my type for an assistant," she looked him dead in the eye and replied, "That's okay. You're not my type for a boss either. But I still plan on being the best damn assistant you've ever had." That was the moment something shifted. And Ethan hated it. She questioned him in meetings. She remembered things he didn't. She read between the lines and called him out when no one else dared. She organized his life better than anyone had before, and she did it without ever pretending to like him. She didn't laugh at his dry sarcasm. She didn't flirt. She didn't try to impress him. She challenged him. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Ethan Kross felt off balance. What began as cold wars over calendar entries and office temperatures slowly unraveled into awkward elevator silences, then late-night strategy sessions, and eventually, quiet moments when their walls cracked just enough for something else to seep in. One time, when his migraine flared up during a 16-hour meeting day, Sophie quietly dimmed the lights, brought him ginger tea, and left a sticky note. "You don't have to be indestructible every day. Even Iron Man powers down." He didn't say thank you. But he didn't throw it away either. Another night, when Sophie broke down in the parking garage after getting a call about her sister being rushed to the ER, Ethan saw her crying behind the steering wheel of her old beat-up car. He didn't say a word, just got in the passenger seat and sat there with her in silence until she calmed down. Then he handed her his driver's number and told her, "Next time, take my car." No arguments. They never talked about it again. But something was changing. Their banter became something more than just verbal fencing. Their silences grew heavier, softer. Their eyes lingered a little too long. She started to see the man behind the arrogance, the one who buried his grief in productivity, who hadn't spoken to his father in 12 years, who ate dinner alone in his penthouse every night with the city lights as his only companion. And he began to realize that Sophie Lane wasn't just competent, she was compassionate, fierce, funny, honest. The kind of woman who didn't fall at his feet, because she had no reason to. She wasn't after his money. She wasn't afraid of his power. And maybe that's why, against every rule he lived by, he started to fall. But love in a corporate battlefield is never simple. Pride, power, miscommunication, and one fateful mistake would threaten to shatter it all. Because when hearts begin to feel in a world that rewards logic, something has to give. And sometimes, the very thing you feared the most, letting someone in, is the only thing that can save you. Session 1. The interview that should have broken her, but didn't. The doors to Crosstech's 51st floor didn't just open, they judged you. From the moment Sophie Lane stepped out of the elevator, she felt it, the sharp stiletto clicks on marble floors, the hushed murmurs from assistants in designer suits, the way everyone walked like they were one bad email away from a nervous breakdown. This was not just an office. It was a war zone in heels and tailored suits. But Sophie had fought tougher battles than corporate politics. She adjusted her off-brand blazer, smoothed her ponytail, and walked straight toward the corner office. No one greeted her, no one offered water, and when she arrived outside Ethan Cross's door, the receptionist didn't even look up. "You're 3 minutes early." "He hates that." Sophie blinked. "You mean I'm not late?" The woman smirked. "He hates that too." Before she could respond, the door opened with a click. "Lane, in." His voice was as cold as the skyline view behind him. Sophie stepped into the lion's den. Ethan Cross stood tall behind a desk made of black steel and glass, backlit by the Manhattan skyline. He didn't offer a seat, didn't smile, just looked her over once, calculating, clinical, and dropped her resume onto the table like it offended him. "Let me guess," he said, folding his arms. "Small town girl, no connections. You think hard work and optimism are going to get you through this building?" Sophie didn't flinch. "No, I think competence and grit will." His eyebrow twitched. "Barely. I've had 4 assistants in 6 months," he said, circling her slowly. "One cried in my elevator. One sued me for emotional distress. One wrote a blog post about escaping tyranny in corporate America. And the last one," he paused, smirking, "didn't last through lunch." Sophie shrugged. Maybe lunch was bad. He stared at her. She stared right back. He was testing her. She knew it. Every second in that room was a landmine. "So," he said sharply, "tell me, why should I let someone with your background, a public university, no private sector experience, and a car that probably doesn't start in the winter, manage my life?" She looked him in the eye. "Because your last 4 assistants tried to impress you." "I won't." He froze. "I don't care about your money, your image, or your so-called legacy." Sophie continued. "I care about doing my job well. I've worked since I was 15. Waitressed double shifts to put my sister through school. Learned efficiency because I couldn't afford mistakes. I don't need to be liked. I just need to be useful." There was a beat of silence. Then Ethan gestured to the chair. "Sit." She did. He grilled her for the next 20 minutes. She passed every test: rapid scheduling, conflict scenarios, confidentiality protocol. When he dropped obscure legal terms just to trip her up, she countered with case citations. When he asked about prioritization during crisis meetings, she laid out a 3-tier system with backup contingencies. Not once did she stutter. But what got him wasn't her answers. It was her control. She never tried to soften her voice to sound agreeable. Never laughed at his cold sarcasm. She didn't flirt, fawn, or fear him. She simply did not care who he was. And that bothered him. "You know I'm not an easy man," he finally said, folding his hands. "People don't last around me. I don't do small talk. I don't like being asked how my day is. And I don't tolerate weakness." Sophie rose from her seat. "I'm not looking for friendship, Mr. Cross," she said quietly. "I'm looking for results." Then she turned to go. At the door, she paused, something in her gut telling her to say it, even if it cost her the job. And for the record, she added without turning around, "You don't intimidate me. You just look like a man who forgot how to be human." She left. The office was silent. Ethan stood frozen behind his desk, staring at the closed door. No one had spoken to him like that in years. 3 hours later, Sophie was at home folding laundry when her phone buzzed. Subject: employment offer. From Ethan Cross. Message: start tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp. Dress for battle. She smirked, just a little. Not because she got the job, but because he thought he was the one giving orders now. What she didn't know was that she had just become the only person in the building Ethan Cross couldn't predict, couldn't manipulate, and maybe couldn't resist. And what he didn't know was that she had her own secrets, her own wounds, and a reason for needing this job far beyond what anyone could imagine. This wasn't just an assistant role. This was survival. Session 2. Her first day, and his first mistake. The sun hadn't fully risen over Manhattan when Sophie Lane stood outside the towering glass walls of Cross Tech. She clutched her thermos with one hand and her nerves with the other. This wasn't just her first day on a new job. This was her first day in his world. Ethan Cross's world. People said working for him was like dancing on a landmine. You could do everything right, and still get blown to pieces. But Sophie didn't come to dance. She came to win. 6:58 a.m. She arrived on the 51st floor exactly 2 minutes early. The office was already buzzing with sharp heels and sharper stares. Assistants typing with military precision. Phones ringing in clipped tones. No one smiling. Not even the espresso machine dared to hiss too loud. At 6:59, Sophie adjusted the collar of her thrifted blazer and took a steadying breath. At 7 o'clock on the dot, she stepped into Ethan's office without knocking. He looked up. Barely. "You're exactly on time," he said flatly. "That's rare." Sophie placed her notebook on the desk and replied, "Punctuality is free. No excuse not to bring it." A pause. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. "Let's see if your brain matches your clock." 7:45 a.m. First meeting. Internal strategy with senior department heads. Ethan led with his usual intensity. Sophie stayed quiet, taking notes faster than his words could travel. Everything was precise, efficient, until one executive brought up the updated 5-year revenue forecast. Sophie frowned. She'd reviewed those numbers while prepping Ethan's files the night before. Something about them felt off. But she said nothing. This wasn't her place. Not yet. The conversation moved on, until Ethan asked a direct question about margin trends. The room fell silent. Everyone hesitated, afraid to be wrong in front of him. Sophie's hand went up. Ethan looked over slowly. "Miss Lane?" She cleared her throat. "The revenue model used last year's inflation rate. The projection is overstated. It could compromise future valuation estimates by about 6.4%. The room went cold. You could hear someone swallow. The CFO turned red. That's not accurate." Sophie didn't back down. Page 12, third paragraph. I highlighted it in yellow. Ethan turned to his tablet. Swiped once, twice, then stopped. There it was. Exactly as she said. He glanced back at Sophie. She didn't gloat. She just waited. Ethan didn't say thank you. But he moved on. And everyone else in the room took note. 10:12 a.m. Back in his office, Ethan closed the door behind them. Firm, not angry, just heavier than before. "You could have embarrassed him less," he said without looking at her. Sophie stayed calm. "I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I was trying to stop an error from going public." He turned to her then. Eyes sharp, guarded. "That's not your job." She looked at him evenly. "Then fire me." A beat. Silence. "I don't fire people for being right," Ethan said, almost grudgingly. "I just don't like being surprised." Sophie's voice softened. "Neither do investors. You hired me to keep your world running. That includes stopping you from making preventable mistakes." He didn't respond, just stared at her like he couldn't decide whether to argue or thank her. Eventually, he exhaled. "Fix the forecast." Quietly. "Already did," she replied, turning toward her desk. "You'll have the revised version before lunch." 12:30 p.m. In the executive break room. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you hear? The new girl corrected Ethan, in public. She's still employed? She's still alive?" Meanwhile, Sophie sat quietly, eating her tuna sandwich like she didn't just shake the power hierarchy before noon. One of the older assistants walked by and muttered, "You've got guts, honey." Sophie smiled. "No, I've got math." 2:20 p.m. Vanessa, Ethan's senior operations manager, stopped by Sophie's desk. She was dressed in flawless white, with the cold elegance of someone born into country clubs and confidence. "Word of advice," she said smoothly. "Don't outshine him. It won't end well." Sophie didn't blink. That would require him caring enough to notice. Vanessa smirked. "Oh, he noticed. We all did." Then she walked away. Sophie leaned back, eyes on her screen. but her heart beat a little faster. She'd made a dent. Now she had to survive it. 4:47 p.m. Ethan checked his phone. A message from the company's largest investor. Forecast correction was spot on. Smart call. Tell your new girl she saved us a red flag. Ethan looked up. Through the glass wall. There she was, still typing. Still focused. Still there. No victory dance. No arrogance. Just quiet efficiency. He didn't say a word. But for the first time in years, he felt something unexpected. Gratitude. And maybe a flicker of something else. Something more dangerous. 5:58 p.m. Sophie grabbed her coat. Ethan stepped out of his office. He held out a to-go cup. Double shot. Almond milk. No sugar. Your file said you preferred it. She raised an eyebrow. Surprised. You read my file? I read everything, he replied. She took the cup. Cautiously. What's the catch? No catch. You saved my ass this morning. Even I acknowledge that. Sophie smirked. I'll make a note. Ethan Cross shows signs of being human. He chuckled. Short. Dry. But real. See you at 7 tomorrow. Lane. You'll be lucky if I'm not early. And just like that, the battlefield had shifted. Sophie had survived her first day. Not because she played it safe. But because she stood her ground. And Ethan? He made his first mistake, not by underestimating her, but by realizing too late she might be the one thing in his life he couldn't control. Session 3. She saw the man behind the monster. Just for a moment, Sophie Lane had seen power before. She'd served tables for politicians, worked night shifts at hospitals under high-pressure surgeons, even interned briefly for a judge with a god complex. But nothing compared to Ethan Cross. He didn't demand attention. He commanded it, without raising his voice. Without saying more than necessary. He was a storm in a custom suit. Calculated. Cold. Until today. Because today, for one brief moment, she saw past the armor. And she didn't mean to. 7:03 a.m., day 2. Sophie was already at her desk. Typing up follow-up reports from yesterday's strategy meeting. Ethan hadn't arrived yet, unusual. According to the staff gossip she overheard in the elevator. He's always in before the cleaners. Probably sleeps in his office. Or doesn't sleep at all. So when the clock hit 7:15, and his door was still shut, Sophie hesitated. She checked her email, nothing. Slack, silent. Then, almost against her better judgment, she knocked once and pushed the door open. What she saw stopped her. Ethan Cross, king of the 51st floor, the man who never blinked, was sitting on the couch in the far corner of his office. Not behind his desk, not typing, not talking, just sitting, in silence, in the shadows. His jacket was off, his shirt sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, one hand rested on the back of his neck, eyes closed, head leaned back like the weight of something invisible was crushing him. He looked human, tired, alone, worn. He didn't notice her at first, and for those 10 seconds, Sophie felt like she'd stepped into another world. A world where Ethan wasn't a machine. He was just a man, fighting battles no one else could see. Then he opened his eyes. Their gazes locked. Sophie straightened instinctively. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You weren't at your desk and... He didn't yell, didn't scold. He just nodded once and said, close the door, Lane. She did. 7:40 a.m. Ethan finally sat at his desk. The storm was back in his eyes. But something about him looked softer. Reschedule my 9 a.m. Tell Michelle to move the vendor call to Thursday. And cancel dinner with the investors. Sophie typed quickly. Anything else? A pause. Then he said, almost too quietly, my mother passed away 3 years ago today. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. I wasn't going to mention it. He added, I don't talk about her. Not to anyone. Sophie said nothing. She didn't offer condolences. Didn't soften her voice or tilt her head with pity. She simply looked at him and said, you still showed up. He met her eyes. I always show up. I know, she said, but today, that means more. Something passed between them, unspoken, unforced. Just two people, acknowledging pain in a world that didn't make space for it. 10:30 a.m., department review. He was back in full force. Sharp, commanding, efficient. But today, when Sophie handed him a file mid-presentation, their fingers brushed. It was nothing, just a second. But Ethan glanced at her, not like a boss checking for accuracy. but like a man trying to remember what her touch felt like. And Sophie? Her heart skipped, because somewhere between calendar alerts and investor briefs, the ice was melting. 12:15 p.m., lunch hour. Sophie didn't eat in the break room anymore. After yesterday's rumors, the looks, the snide comments, she preferred the small conference room on the 50th floor. Quiet, private. She was halfway through her sandwich when the door opened. Ethan walked in with a coffee and a plain bagel. "Relax," he said, noticing her startled look. "I needed silence too." She nodded, shifting her notebook aside. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Then he said, "I used to play piano." Sophie looked up. He stared at the skyline. Before the company, before the deals, before all this. She smiled softly. "What happened?" He gave a half shrug. "My father said music was for dreamers. Told me I'd starve, so I put it away. Haven't touched a key in over 15 years. Sophie's voice was quiet. "Do you miss it?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I don't know. Sometimes I wonder who I would have been if I'd chosen differently." Silence settled again. This time, warm. 3:42 p.m., unexpected meeting. The board called a surprise audit. Ethan, unfazed, prepped with surgical focus. Sophie ran interference, printed documents, filtered calls, even rewrote a section of his response when she noticed an outdated policy quote. "You're learning fast," Ethan said as they walked to the boardroom. She smirked. "Told you I was good." He stopped. "You're better than good." And for a moment, that compliment hung in the air longer than it should have. 6 p.m., the elevator. The day was over. Office lights dimming. The storm outside mirrored the one inside Ethan's chest. Sophie stepped into the elevator first. He followed. Just the two of them. The ride was quiet until she turned to him and asked, "Do you think your mom would be proud of you?" He looked stunned, not because she asked, but because she was the first one who ever had. "I think she'd be disappointed I stopped playing," he said, voice low, "but maybe not in everything else." Sophie nodded. "She'd be proud. You built something from nothing. You didn't just survive, you dominated." Ethan looked at her, really looked. And for the first time since he became Ethan Cross, CEO, boardroom wolf, Wall Street titan, he felt seen. Not feared, not admired, just seen. And he wasn't sure if he liked it, or if he needed it more than he realized. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. She thought about the way he said, music. The way his walls dropped for just a second. The way his pain mirrored hers more than she wanted to admit. She'd come into this job expecting war. She never expected to care. Session 4. A storm traps them together, and one truth comes out. Thursday, 4:14 p.m. The New York sky was turning a color that didn't belong to daylight. Gray, then black, then bruised purple. By the time the first thunder cracked over the skyline, most of the Crosstech staff had already packed up early, rushing to beat what the weather alerts were calling the worst spring storm in over a decade. But not Ethan Cross, and not Sophie Lane. They were both still at the office, because neither of them knew how to walk away from unfinished business. 4:45 p.m., 51st floor. Executive wing. Rain pounded the windows like fists. Thunder rumbled low and deep, echoing through the building like a warning. But inside Ethan's office, everything was still, except for the tension in the air. Sophie stood by the shelves, sorting contracts he needed for a late-night investor review. Ethan sat at his desk, reviewing slides, jaw tight, eyes scanning but not really seeing. When the lights flickered once, then went out completely, they both froze. Then, emergency backup lighting, dim, moody, just enough to see each other. And the silence between them suddenly felt louder than the thunder outside. "We lost power?" Sophie asked, walking to the window. "Backup generators only support essentials." Ethan muttered, "Elevators will be down, doors might lock." She turned. "You're saying, we're trapped here?" He looked up. "Not forever. Just tonight. A beat. Just the two of them." The storm outside howling. And inside, a different kind of storm beginning to stir. 5:20 p.m., Ethan's office. Still no power. They lit a few candles from a cabinet, emergency supplies, hidden behind branded mugs and dusty awards. Sophie wrapped herself in a spare cashmere throw someone had left draped over a guest chair. "I always thought power outages were kind of romantic," she joked softly, sitting on the window ledge. "You know, Before they happen. Ethan raised a brow. Still seated. You find chaos romantic? I find vulnerability romantic. He paused. That's dangerous, he said. Maybe, she said, but honesty is always dangerous in the wrong room. Their eyes locked. He looked away first. 5:45 p.m. Conversation that wasn't supposed to happen. What about you? Sophie asked, sipping from a lukewarm cup of tea. You ever get scared? Ethan chuckled without humor. Scared? I run a multi-billion-dollar company. I fire people before breakfast. I don't have time to be scared. That's not what I asked. He leaned back. I don't do scared, Lane. I do strategy. Control. Execution. She tilted her head. Control is just fear in a more expensive suit. That landed. He said nothing. I read your file. She continued. The part no one talks about. You took over the company 3 days after your father died. Didn't stop. Didn't pause. Just kept going. It was necessary. No. It was survival. There's a difference. Silence. She had touched something sacred. Or broken. He leaned forward. Elbows on knees. Voice low. I was 29. I walked into the boardroom with my father's blood still on my cuff. The directors didn't even give me a condolence card. Just a merger document to sign. Sophie's eyes didn't leave him. I'm sorry. He shook his head. Don't be. That's the moment I realized no one was coming to save me. And that's when it slipped, the mask. For the first time, Ethan Cross didn't look powerful. He looked tired. 6:30 p.m. A truth she didn't expect. They sat on the floor now. The table between them cleared of work. For once, there were no contracts, no strategy boards, just two people in a dark room, lit by candlelight and thunder. Sophie toyed with the hem of her sleeve. You know, I almost didn't come to that interview. Ethan looked over. Why? Because I was afraid I'd start liking this job. And I didn't want to like anything again. Not after my mom. He didn't press. But she continued. She passed 6 months ago. Stroke. Fast. Cruel. I spent years taking care of her, putting off dreams. Skipping opportunities. When she was gone, I felt guilty for being free. Ethan's voice was soft. And now? Now I'm learning that freedom doesn't mean peace. It just means you have to choose what to do with the pain. He nodded. And you chose me? She smiled sadly. I chose something hard enough to silence the grief. He looked down at the floor. Exhaled hard. The room grew quiet again. But not empty. 7:15 p.m. The crack in the wall. Lightning flashed across the sky, brightening the glass behind them. Sophie looked at him. The candlelight made him seem younger. Less invincible. What would you have done? She asked. If you hadn't become this? He didn't answer right away. Then, I wanted to teach music. Sophie blinked. Seriously? He nodded. In another life. Small studio. Old piano. Maybe a kid or two learning scales and forgetting to practice. Something quieter. Something real. Her voice barely above a whisper. That still sounds like a life. Ethan turned to her. Slowly. Their faces were close now. Too close. I don't remember the last time someone asked me what I wanted. He said. You should get used to it. She said, her breath catching. Because I'm going to keep asking. The storm roared behind them. But neither of them moved. 7:31 p.m. The almost. He looked at her lips. Just once. And that was enough. Her breath hitched. But before anything could happen, her phone buzzed. A message from the building manager. Power restored. Elevators rebooting now. And just like that, the spell broke. They both stood. Fast. Like standing erased what almost happened. Back to business. Back to boundaries. But something had changed. That night, alone in her apartment, Sophie stared out the window as the last of the rain fell. She touched her lips. Nothing had happened. But everything had shifted. And Ethan? He poured himself a drink in silence. No music. No emails. Just one thought echoing through his mind. She saw me. And he hadn't stopped her. Not even for a second. Session 5. The woman in red, and the jealousy he never saw coming. Friday, 8:12 a.m. The world had returned to normal. The power was back. The lights were blinding. The office was humming again with keyboards and coffee orders and the click of ambition against marble floors. But Sophie Lane felt anything but normal. Because after last night, something in her had changed. She couldn't unsee it. The vulnerability in his voice when he spoke about his father. The way his eyes softened at the word music. or how his gaze had lingered on her lips for one breath too long in the candlelight. Nothing had happened, but everything almost had, and almost was its own kind of danger. 8:35 a.m., Executive Lounge. Sophie was scanning Ethan's schedule for the day when she noticed it. 11 a.m., lunch meeting, Vanessa Stratton, the Gramercy Club. Her eyes paused. Vanessa. The name stung more than she expected. Vanessa Stratton was the head of Crosstech's PR division. Tall, flawless, ruthlessly brilliant, and apparently very familiar with Ethan Cross. Sophie had only interacted with her twice. Both times, Vanessa's tone dripped with polite condescension, like she saw Sophie not as a professional, but as a passing inconvenience. Now Vanessa was meeting Ethan for lunch at the Gramercy Club, alone. Sophie reminded herself, it's not your business. You're his assistant, not his girlfriend, not even his friend, but her hands clenched around her coffee cup anyway. 11:02 a.m., the Gramercy Club. Vanessa entered like she owned the place. Red silk dress, diamond-studded watch, smile that never reached her eyes. Ethan stood when she approached. Gentlemanly, controlled, but Sophie, watching from a distance by the valet stand, couldn't miss the way Vanessa's hand lingered on his shoulder. Sophie was only there to deliver a contract Ethan had forgotten. That was the official reason. The real reason? She just wanted to see. When she reached the table, Ethan looked surprised, but not displeased. You didn't have to bring this yourself, he said. I was already nearby. Sophie lied. Vanessa glanced at her with a thin smile. Well, isn't this convenient? Sophie forced a polite smile. Just doing my job. Vanessa's eyes flicked between them. She saw it, the current, the invisible thread tying Ethan and Sophie together. And she didn't like it. Ethan and I were just reminiscing, Vanessa said, her voice syrupy. Do you remember that weekend in Milan? God, the wine was terrible, but the view from your hotel. Sophie turned away. Ethan noticed, and for the first time, he felt something sharp in his chest. Was it guilt? No, that would imply he owed her something. And he didn't, right? 12:45 p.m. 51st floor. Back in the office, Sophie didn't say a word. She typed, she scheduled, she sent emails, and she avoided looking at him. Ethan noticed. He watched her fingers fly across the keyboard. Faster than usual, her shoulders tight, her tone clipped when she spoke. Finally, he said, something wrong, Lane? She didn't look up. Nothing that concerns you, Mr. Cross. He flinched. Mr. Cross. She hadn't called him that since day one. He stood, walked around his desk, close enough to feel the tension in the air between them. I sense attitude, he said. No, she replied. You sense boundaries. His jaw tightened. You don't get to judge who I have lunch with. I didn't, she said calmly. I just delivered a contract. And watched you flirt with a woman who calls you by your first name like it's a possession. Ethan stepped closer. Are you jealous? Sophie met his eyes, fierce and unapologetic. No, I'm disappointed. That hit harder than he expected. Why? Because last night, you showed me something real. And today, you're right back to performing for the power suits and society girls. He stared at her, then turned away. Because the truth was, she was right. And that scared the hell out of him. 3 p.m., private message. A Slack ping lit up on Sophie's screen. From Ethan. Cancel the rest of my afternoon. And block out tonight. We need to talk. She hesitated, then typed back, personal or professional? His reply, both. 8 p.m., the rooftop. Crosstech's rooftop garden wasn't on the building map. It was Ethan's sanctuary, a place only a few knew existed. Sophie had never been up here. Until now. She stepped out onto the stone path lined with soft lights and saw him, hands in his pockets. Shirt sleeves rolled up, looking out over the skyline like he was searching for something he'd lost. You don't bring women here, she said. He turned. No, I don't. Why me? Because you already see everything anyway. She walked closer, the air between them humming again, charged with things they couldn't say during business hours. You were right, Ethan said. Vanessa was easy, familiar. It meant nothing. I didn't ask, Sophie replied. But I wanted to tell you. That mattered more than she wanted to admit. They stood in silence for a moment, New York blowing around them. Then Ethan said softly, you make me think about the version of myself I buried a long time ago. She looked at him. Maybe he's not buried. Maybe he's just waiting. He stepped closer. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the gravity. If I asked you to stay, he whispered, just for a while, not as my assistant, but just as you, would you? Sophie's breath caught, but before she could answer, her phone rang. A hospital number. She froze, then answered. Her face fell. What is it? Ethan asked. She turned, voice trembling. It's my sister. She collapsed. They think it's her heart. Without another word, he grabbed his keys. Come on, I'll drive. And just like that, the moment vanished. Because life didn't wait for love stories. Session 6. The hospital hallway where it all came crashing down. Friday, 8:47 p.m., Midtown Presbyterian Hospital. The rain had returned. It wasn't pouring, not like the storm from 2 nights ago, but it fell with that slow, constant rhythm that makes everything feel a little heavier. Sophie sat in the emergency waiting room, hands clenched around a styrofoam cup of cold coffee she wasn't drinking. Ethan sat beside her, silent, still. They hadn't spoken since the call. He drove like a man possessed, blowing red lights, ignoring speed limits, one hand steady on the wheel, the other gripping his phone, demanding updates from the hospital before they even arrived. Now, in the harsh fluorescent light, he looked almost small. And Sophie? She was breaking quietly. 9:02 p.m. A nurse walked out with a clipboard. Sophie jumped to her feet. Ms. Lane? Yes, I'm her sister. She's stable. We're moving her to ICU for monitoring. The arrhythmia responded to meds. She'll need further tests. But for now, she's okay. Sophie nearly collapsed from the relief. Ethan caught her arm, and she didn't pull away. Not this time. 9:17 p.m. ICU hallway. They stood outside the glass wall, watching Sophie's younger sister, Emily, lie unconscious. Pale and still. Monitors beeped softly. Tubes ran from her arms. Machines breathed where her lungs struggled. I should have seen it coming. Sophie whispered. She's been fainting for weeks. Said it was just stress. She wiped her face roughly with the back of her hand. I was so busy proving I could survive on my own. I wasn't there for her. Ethan's voice was quiet. You're here now. It's not enough. He turned to her, really turned, and what he saw cracked him open. This wasn't the Sophie Lane who stood up to him in a boardroom. This wasn't the woman who outsmarted executives or challenged his every move. This was a sister, a protector, a fighter, finally brought to her knees. I didn't know, he said, about her, about any of this, because I don't tell people things. Sophie said, laughing bitterly. I've spent my whole life being the strong one. That means no crying, no weakness, just hustle and carry the world until it breaks you. Ethan's voice was barely audible. Maybe you're allowed to let someone else carry it for once. She turned to him slowly. I don't know how. And that was the most honest thing she'd ever said. 9:50 p.m. Vending machine corner. They sat on the floor against a blank hallway wall. A shared pack of stale pretzels between them. The silence was gentle now. Companionable. I was 11 when our dad left. Sophie said, her voice soft. My mom had to work 3 jobs. Emily was only 4. I raised her, fed her, got her through school. Every win I've ever had, I earned. But every setback, it cost us both. Ethan listened. No interjections, no advice, just presence. She continued. After Mom died, it was just the 2 of us. And I promised I'd never let Emily feel alone. But I got this job, and suddenly, I was working late nights, obsessing over schedules, keeping up with you. I thought if I could just succeed, if I could just win, it would all be worth it. Ethan's throat tightened. I get that. Do you? He looked at her. My mother died when I was 29. He said, she had cancer. Stage 4. She never told me. Sophie blinked. What? She didn't want to be a burden. She said I was doing something great. And she didn't want to interrupt. He took a breath. By the time I found out, she had 3 weeks left. She died alone. And I was at a stockholder retreat in Aspen. Silence fell again. Deeper. Rawer. Then Ethan whispered, no amount of winning ever makes that okay. Sophie looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Because behind the empire, behind the arrogance, behind the perfect suits and perfect strategies, there was just a man. A son. A man who'd lost too much. Too soon, just like her. 10:22 p.m. ICU room. Sophie stood beside her sister's bed. brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. She looked so young, so fragile. I forgot what this feels like, Sophie said, her voice catching, to be scared of losing everything and realizing you don't actually have control. Ethan stepped forward, slowly. You don't, but you pretend you do, she murmured. Every day. He nodded. Sophie looked at him, eyes glistening. How do you live with the guilt? Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he stepped closer, and did something he hadn't done with anyone in years. He reached for her hand. She let him. No words, no promises. Just skin to skin, warmth in the coldest place. And in that small, silent gesture, something broke. And something began. 11:30 p.m., parking garage. Ethan walked her to her car. I'll clear your schedule for Monday, he said. Take all the time you need. Sophie looked at him. You don't clear schedules. I do now. She smiled softly, leaning against the driver's side door. Then she looked up at him. There's something about you, Ethan. What? You pretend you don't have a heart. But I've seen it. He said nothing. She stepped into the car, closed the door, and started the engine. But before she pulled away, she rolled down the window and added, I just hope one day, you stop hiding it. Then she drove off, leaving Ethan standing in the dark, hands in his pockets, heart pounding with a truth he could no longer ignore. And that night, he didn't go back to the office. He didn't check his email. He didn't pour a drink. He just stood there, thinking about her. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cross didn't feel invincible. He felt seen, and it scared him more than any deal ever had. Session 7. She tried to walk away, but he couldn't let her. Monday, 6:12 a.m., Ethan Cross's penthouse. The city was still asleep when Ethan opened his eyes. He hadn't slept much, not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, sitting on the hospital floor, her voice cracking, her hand in his, her eyes, fierce, vulnerable, real. He wasn't used to this. Feelings didn't belong in his world. But Sophie Lane didn't follow his rules. And now? Now she was slipping away. 9:07 a.m., Cross Tech office, 51st floor. Ethan stood at his glass wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning the skyline, but not really seeing it. His inbox was full, his calendar was packed, and still, it all felt irrelevant. Because Sophie hadn't shown up. And she hadn't answered his texts. Not last night, not this morning. It wasn't like her. She was consistent, grounded, tough. Unless she was trying to disappear. 9:14 a.m., text message. Ethan. Are you okay? Delivered. Read. No reply. He paced. Then he did something he never did. He left the building without telling anyone. 10:02 a.m., Harlem apartment. Sophie opened the door still wearing sweatpants and a faded college hoodie. She didn't look surprised to see him. Ethan, she said, what are you doing here? You didn't answer. I didn't think I had to. He stepped inside before she could stop him. The apartment was small, lived in, filled with books, tea mugs, and post-it notes with reminders scribbled in Sharpie. Emily's bag was on the counter. A heart monitor beeped faintly from the bedroom. I'm not coming back, Sophie said gently. Before he could even ask, Ethan turned to face her. What? I've thought about it. This job, it was never supposed to be permanent. I took it because I needed structure. Stability. But now you're leaving. She nodded. Emily needs me. And I need to stop pretending I can carry two worlds at once. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I can move you both somewhere better. Somewhere closer to better care. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Sophie? She met his eyes. Steady. You said it yourself once. I don't belong in your world. And maybe you were right. Your life is built on silence. Distance. Walls. I've lived behind walls my whole life. Ethan, I don't want to love someone I have to decode. His jaw tightened. You think this is just about control? I think you're scared. He didn't answer. Because she was right. Dead right. 10:30 a.m., her kitchen. They sat at the kitchen table. The tea kettle hissed softly behind them. You have no idea what it's like to need someone and know you can't ask. Ethan finally said. Sophie looked at him. Try me. He exhaled. I built everything I have on not needing anyone. And then you walk in. With your questions. Your honesty. Your damn compassion. He shook his head. You ruined everything. Sophie smiled sadly. Maybe it needed to be ruined. Then silence. He looked at her, something raw and desperate in his eyes. "I don't know how to let you go." "You don't have to," she whispered, "but you do have to let me breathe." 11:15 a.m., the twist. Just as Ethan stood to leave, Sophie handed him a sealed envelope. "What's this?" "My resignation." He stared at it. "Didn't take it. Take care of yourself, Ethan," she said softly. "You're better than the man you pretend to be." He still didn't take it. Just looked at her. Like this was the one deal he couldn't close. Then finally, he turned and left, and Sophie closed the door behind him with shaking hands. Later that night, Ethan's penthouse. He stared at the envelope on his desk. Still sealed. Still full of everything he never wanted to face. He picked it up, opened it, but inside, it wasn't just a resignation. It was a letter. Handwritten. "Dear Ethan, you once asked me what I saw in you. The truth is, I saw the man you hide from yourself. The one who still remembers music. The one who sat beside me when my sister was dying. The one who didn't need to speak because presence was enough. You think people stay because of power. But I would have stayed because of kindness. You never needed to be perfect. You just needed to be honest. And if you ever decide to be that man, you know where to find me. Always. Sophie." Ethan didn't sleep that night. He read the letter 4 times. And by morning, he knew what he had to do. 7:59 a.m. 1 week later, Sophie stood outside a local clinic, filling out intake forms for Emily's follow-up care. Her eyes were tired, but her heart felt lighter. Until a shadow fell over the clipboard. She looked up. It was him, Ethan, in jeans, no tie, no suit, holding a thermos in one hand and a single daisy in the other. She blinked. "You're here?" He nodded. "I don't want to decode you anymore." Sophie smiled, slow, disbelieving. "I resigned. I didn't accept it. I left your world, Ethan. Then I'll meet you in yours." He held out the thermos. "Almond milk, 1 pump cinnamon. Still your favorite?" She took it slowly. Still warm. And so was the look in his eyes. And that's when she knew. He wasn't just here to bring coffee. He was here to bring himself. Finally. Session 8. She let him in. But her sister's past could destroy everything. Monday. 8:43 a.m. Lower Manhattan Community Clinic. Sophie hadn't expected to see him again. Not like that. Not in jeans. Not with coffee. And definitely not with that look in his eyes, the one that said he chose her. Not just out of impulse. But with intention. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. And after all the storms they'd weathered together, real was more than enough. 9 a.m. Clinic lobby. Ethan sat beside Sophie in the waiting area, flipping through a magazine he clearly wasn't reading. Every now and then, his eyes drifted to her, quiet, steady, calm in a way she hadn't been the last time they sat like this. "How's she doing?" he asked gently. "Better," Sophie said. "The meds are working. The cardiologist wants to do another scan. But, it's progress." He nodded. "And you?" She looked over, still adjusting to the idea that you're sitting here like a regular person. He smirked. "I'm evolving." She bumped his shoulder playfully. Dangerous territory. Then, from across the hall, "Ms. Lane?" A nurse waved her over. "We just need to confirm a few details in the system." Sophie stood. "I'll be right back." Ethan watched her go. The space beside him suddenly colder. 9:12 a.m. Records room. Sophie was reviewing insurance paperwork when the nurse hesitated. "There's something odd here," she said. "What do you mean?" "It's your sister's file. There's a flag on her social. It's tied to an older police report." Sophie froze. "A what?" "From 2 years ago. A hospital in Albany. It's sealed, but it shows up in the system when flagged for narcotics access." Sophie's throat tightened. No, that has to be a mistake. I'm sorry. I just thought you should know before the specialist runs a background-linked insurance profile." Sophie stood completely still. A hospital. A police report. Drugs? Emily? Her Emily? 9:40 a.m. Outside the clinic. Sophie didn't speak the whole ride home. Ethan could feel it. Something was wrong. Off. He pulled over just a few blocks from her apartment. "What happened?" She shook her head. "It's nothing." "Sophie." She looked at him, eyes wet. "It's Emily." He stilled. "What about her?" She inhaled shakily. "There's a sealed record in her medical history. Something tied to narcotics. From a hospital in Albany. 2 years ago. I didn't know. She never told me." Ethan processed it in silence. Sophie continued, voice cracking. What if she was using? What if that's why she collapsed? What if I've been protecting someone who's been lying to me this whole time? He reached out, took her hand. You don't know the full story yet. She's my baby sister, Ethan, and I've made every decision around the belief that I knew her. Even the best people have pasts, he said quietly. She looked at him, pain flooding her voice. Would it change how you see me? He didn't hesitate. No, but it might change how you see yourself. Later that afternoon, Sophie's apartment. Emily was sitting up in bed, pale but smiling, sipping weak tea. Hey, you, she said, voice raspy. Sophie sat beside her, holding back the storm inside her chest. We got a weird flag on your file today, she said gently. Something from Albany, a sealed report. Emily froze, and that was all Sophie needed to see. You knew, Sophie whispered. Emily nodded, eyes filling. I was working nights as a med tech, she said, voice trembling. Mom had just died. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. One of the nurses gave me a few pills to take the edge off. It turned into something bigger. I passed out during a shift. They found the stash in my locker. Sophie sat still, silent. I did a 6-week outpatient rehab. Emily continued. The hospital dropped the charges if I left voluntarily and agreed to treatment. I swore I'd tell you. But I was so scared you'd look at me like I'd failed you. Tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks. You didn't fail me, she whispered. You just never gave me the chance to be there for you. I didn't want to ruin your life. You had just gotten your first real job. You were finally okay. No, Sophie said, reaching for her hand. I wasn't okay. I was surviving, just like you. That night, Ethan's penthouse. Ethan stared at the city, arms crossed, mind racing. Could this thing between them survive a scandal? He wasn't worried about his image. Not really. He was worried about hers. Sophie had spent her entire life cleaning up messes she didn't create, carrying burdens alone. And now? Now her past was a loaded gun that could be used against her. Especially in his world. Especially in his media circles. Vanessa would pounce. The board would whisper. The vultures would circle. So when Sophie knocked at his door, he opened it with equal parts relief and fear. I told her I forgave her, she said. And do you? I do. But now I need to forgive myself for not knowing. Ethan pulled her into the apartment. Not to hide her, but to hold her. And for the first time, she let him. And outside, the world kept turning. But inside? Inside, two broken people were learning to build something new. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Session 9. The article that exposed everything, and the man who fought to protect her. Tuesday, 6:42 a.m., Cross-Tech boardroom. Ethan had been in hundreds of meetings, high-stakes mergers, billion-dollar negotiations, lawsuits that could have ended careers. But nothing felt like this. Vanessa Stratton stood at the head of the long, glossy table, holding up her phone with a bitter smirk. I'm assuming you've seen this? She tapped the screen and turned it toward the group. Breaking. Billionaire CEO's assistant linked to drug scandal. Sister's overdose report surfaces. Below the headline was a photo of Sophie. She wasn't smiling. It looked like a hospital hallway. Candid, vulnerable, the kind of photo tabloids loved. Silence fell across the room. Ethan's jaw tightened. I'll handle it, he said. But Vanessa didn't back down. No offense, Ethan, but this isn't just your PR problem. It's our stock price. We can't have scandal tied to your inner circle, especially not with the Q3 Investor Summit next week. She's not the scandal, he said sharply. She's the collateral. A beat. One of the older board members spoke up. If she resigns, the heat dies down. Quietly, professionally. No one blames you. But Ethan already knew. They weren't just asking for Sophie's resignation. They were asking for her erasure. And he wasn't going to allow that. Not this time. Meanwhile, Sophie's apartment. Sophie stood in front of the TV. Breath caught in her chest. Emily sat beside her, pale as paper, tears running down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, she whispered. This is all my fault. Sophie pulled her close. No, it's not. You made a mistake. Someone made sure it would define both of us. The phone rang again. Another call. Another journalist. Another stranger who didn't care about the truth, only the angle. She turned off her phone. Then her laptop. Then she closed her eyes and let the tears fall. Because this time, the strong one had finally had enough. Back at Crosstech 8 a.m., Ethan walked into his private office, closed the door, and pulled out his personal phone. One number, one call. Sophie, he said when she answered. Voice raw. Don't say anything, just listen. I saw the article. She whispered. I know. It wasn't an accident. I figured. A pause. Then she said, it's okay if you have to let me go. His voice broke. No, it's not. Ethan. No, he cut in. I've lived my whole life doing what's expected. Protecting a brand. Hiding behind clean headlines and clean suits. But I won't lose you because someone else decided you're not perfect. She didn't speak, so he kept going. I'm not going to save face. I'm going to show my face. With you. If you'll let me. More silence. Then, through tears. I don't want to be your weakness. He replied without hesitation. You're not. You're the only thing that makes me strong and still feel human. 12 p.m., press conference. No one expected Ethan Cross to show up. And certainly not with Sophie Lane walking beside him, head held high. Hand in his. The flashbulbs exploded the moment they stepped out of the black car. Journalists shouted questions. Mr. Cross, do you confirm the story? Is your assistant involved in drug activity? Are you in a relationship with her? He didn't flinch. He stepped up to the mic, adjusted it once, and looked straight into the storm. There has been speculation about someone very close to me. Let me be clear. Sophie Lane is not a liability. She is not a scandal. And she is not stepping down. A murmur rippled through the press pool. Ethan continued. She is the most intelligent, loyal, and resilient woman I have ever known. Her sister battled something painful and personal. Sophie stood by her, not because it was easy, but because it was right. He paused, then looked directly at the cameras. If our company and our society punishes people for loyalty and compassion, then maybe we're asking the wrong questions. And then, he did what no one saw coming. He reached for Sophie's hand, laced his fingers through hers, and said, let this be the headline. Backstage, moments later, Sophie stared at him, stunned. You just declared war on your board. He looked at her, eyes soft. No, I just declared what matters to me. Her voice cracked. Ethan, you didn't have to. I wanted to. She exhaled, shaking her head. That press conference just changed your whole brand. He smiled. Good, because I'm done being a brand. Then he pulled her close and kissed her in front of half the city. Not for show, not for spin, but because after everything, he finally knew what he was fighting for. And the city? It kept talking. The headlines kept spinning. But in that moment, Sophie Lane wasn't just the assistant anymore. She was the woman he stood beside when the whole world watched. And Ethan Cross wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a man in love. Session 10, the summit, the choice, and the future he built around her. Friday, 8 a.m., Midtown Manhattan. Ritz-Carlton Ballroom. The Investor Summit was the biggest event of the quarter. Over 500 shareholders, live media coverage, a live-streamed keynote that could move markets. And at the heart of it all stood Ethan Cross. Polished, composed, deadly calm. Except this time, he wasn't alone. Sophie Lane stood backstage, just out of the spotlight. She didn't wear anything flashy. No red carpet hair, no designer clutch. Just grace, quiet strength, and a steady look in her eyes that said, no matter what they say, I'm not running. Ethan looked at her one last time before stepping out. You still sure about this? She asked softly. He nodded. For the first time, I'm sure about everything. Then he walked out into the lights. 8:03 a.m., the speech. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan began, his voice deep, steady. We've spent the last 10 years building the most agile, forward-thinking tech company in North America. We've grown fast, expanded globally, broken records, made headlines. He paused. Then, something shifted. But today, I don't want to talk about numbers, or projections, or market share. I want to talk about legacy. The room shifted uneasily. This wasn't on the teleprompter. My father once told me the best leaders are the ones no one remembers. Just the empire they leave behind. For a long time, I believed him. I thought silence, control, and distance made me strong. He took a deep breath. But strength without connection is just isolation with good branding. Murmurs started. People leaned in. 2 weeks ago, Someone I care about was publicly dragged through the mud for a mistake she didn't make. She was judged for her loyalty, her love, her refusal to abandon the people who needed her. And instead of protecting her, I hesitated. Because I was worried about what it would cost. He looked into the crowd. Direct. Unshaken. Well, I've run the math, and I've made my decision. The crowd was silent. Starting next quarter, I'll be stepping down as CEO of Cross Tech. Gasps erupted. Cameras flashed. But I'm not stepping back. I'm building something new, something smaller, human-centered, a startup incubator focused on healthcare and community-based AI. Led by people who know what it means to survive without privilege. He glanced backstage. At her. At the reason this transformation was even possible. My legacy won't be power. It will be purpose. And I won't build it alone. 8:40 a.m., backstage. You just gave up your empire. Sophie whispered, eyes wide. I didn't give it up. Ethan said, I gave it back. She stared at him. Are you sure? He stepped closer. I've never been more sure of anything. Then he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small velvet box. Her heart stopped. I'm not asking you to marry me. He said quickly. Not yet, but I am asking you something harder. She tilted her head, confused. Come with me. Build this next chapter with me. Not as my assistant, not as my escape, but as my partner. Sophie looked at the box, not a ring, but a key. To the new office space. To the new life. To him. Tears welled in her eyes. You really want me at your side? He smiled. You've already been there, longer than I realized. 2 months later, Brooklyn Heights. The new office wasn't fancy. No glass walls, no marble floors. But it was theirs. A community-driven startup hub focused on tech that healed instead of consumed. Ethan wore rolled sleeves now. Sophie wore sneakers. And they still argued, about coffee orders. About launch timing. About how early was too early for morning meetings. But every night, they came home to the same place. To each other. No secrets. No spotlights. No pretending. 1 year later, park bench. Autumn. Emily was healthy. Studying to become a therapist. The media had moved on. The city had moved on. And Ethan? He had never looked back. He sat on a park bench next to Sophie. Watching kids kick up leaves. His hand rested on hers. This, he said, is what peace feels like. Sophie smiled. No boardrooms? No scandals? No suits? Well, maybe one or two. She laughed. And he leaned in. Not for a show. Not for a camera. Just for her. The girl who never needed saving. Only someone who saw her. Chose her. Stood beside her, when it counted. 5 years later. The wedding where she walked down the aisle, and he waited with tears in his eyes. 5 years later, Hudson Valley. New York. The sky was brushed with soft lavender. Golden light filtered through oak trees. The air smelled like wildflowers and rain-soaked wood. It was the kind of day that felt like a promise. Sophie Lane stood in the doorway of the glass chapel, heart pounding beneath layers of satin and silk. Her veil fluttered gently in the breeze. Outside, beneath an arch of white roses and ivy, Ethan Cross stood waiting. He wasn't wearing a tie. Just a white shirt, open at the collar, hands trembling slightly, eyes fixed on the aisle. On her. Sophie had never dreamed of weddings growing up. There was never time for that. Not when she was raising her sister. Not when she was scraping together tuition. Not when love seemed like something for other people. But this wasn't a dream. It was real. Because after everything they had endured, scandal, fear, loss, and love, it always came back to this simple truth. He saw her. He chose her. And he never stopped. As she stepped onto the aisle, the music began. But Ethan couldn't hear it. Not really. His ears were filled with something louder. His heartbeat. And the whisper of every memory they'd made. The day she walked into his office with fire in her voice. The night she cried in a hospital hallway. The moment she almost walked away. And the day she didn't. Tears welled in his eyes before she even reached him. Sophie smiled. The kind of smile that said, we made it. And when she finally stood before him, hands trembling, he whispered, you're late. She raised an eyebrow. By how many seconds? Exactly 42. Then I guess we're even. They laughed quietly. And then the minister spoke. Do you, Ethan Michael Cross, take Sophie Elise Lane to be your partner in this life, for better? For worse? For chaos? For calm? Ethan didn't wait. I do. In every version of every life. The minister turned to Sophie. And do you, Sophie, take Ethan to be your safe place? Your challenge? Your home? She looked at Ethan, tears slipping down her cheeks. I do, even when you act like a CEO at 7 a.m. Laughter rippled through the crowd. And when they kissed, under that sky, under those trees, the world disappeared. Later that night, reception tent. Emily gave the toast. Her voice shook. I used to think love was about fairy tales, about being rescued, but watching Sophie and Ethan, I realized love is about seeing someone at their worst, and loving them harder anyway. She looked at her sister. At every point, Sophie could have chosen safety, but she chose truth. And Ethan, you didn't just love her. You learned how to. She raised her glass. To the couple who taught us that strength doesn't mean silence. It means standing up, especially when it's hardest. Midnight, under the stars. They danced alone, just the two of them. Barefoot in the grass. No photographers. No audience. Just the hum of summer and the echo of vows still fresh. Sophie leaned into his chest. You know, she whispered, you still never told me when you first knew. Knew what? That you loved me. He smiled. The day you challenged me in front of 12 executives, and still brought me ginger tea. She laughed. I knew, he added, because you made me want to become the man you thought I already was. She looked up. You are, she whispered. You always were. And somewhere between the stars and the silence, two people who were never meant to fall in love did, and it changed everything. The end. Thank you for watching today's CEO love stories. Every love story is a journey. One filled with passion, ambition, sacrifice, and unforgettable moments. Here at CEO Love Stories, we bring you the most compelling tales where power, success, and love collide. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget, like to support more incredible content. Comment your thoughts. Can love overcome power and ambition? Subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss our next breathtaking romance. CEO Love Stories, where love and power collide. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. See you in the next story.